Book 1, Chapter 9 of Resurrection. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud, read by David Barnes. Book 1, Chapter 9. The Trial, the Prisoners Questioned. When he had finished his speech, the President turned to the male prisoner. "Simeon Kartinkin, rise." Simeon jumped up, his lips continuing to move nervously and inaudibly. "Your name?" "Simeon Petrov Kartinkin," he said, rapidly, with a cracked voice, having evidently prepared the answer. "What class do you belong to?" "Peasant." "What government, district and parish?" "Tula government, Krapivinskaya district, Kupianovsky parish, the village Borki." "Your age?" 33, born in the year 1008. "What religion?" "Of the Russian religion, Orthodox." "Married?" "Oh, no, sir." "Your occupation?" "I had a place in the Hotel Mauritania." "Have you ever been tried before?" "I never got tried before, because, as we used to live formerly—" "So you never were tried before?" "God forbid, never." "Have you received a copy of the indictment?" "I have." "Sit down." "Euphemia Ivanovna Bochkova," said the President, turning to the next prisoner, but Simeon continued standing in front of Bochkova. "Kartinkin, sit down." Kartinkin continued standing. "Kartinkin, sit down." But Kartinkin sat down only when the usher, with his head on one side and with preternaturally wide-open eyes, ran up and said in a tragic whisper, "Sit down, sit down." Kartinkin sat down as hurriedly as he had risen, wrapping his cloak around him, and again began moving his lips silently. "Your name?" asked the President, with a weary sigh at being obliged to repeat the same questions, without looking at the prisoner, but glancing over a paper that lay before him. The President was so used to his task that, in order to get quicker through it all, he did two things at a time. Bochkova was 43 years old and came from the town of Kolomna. She, too, had been in service at the Hotel Mauritania. "I have never been tried before, and have received a copy of the indictment." She gave her answers boldly, in a tone of voice as if she meant to add to each answer, "And I don't care who knows it, and I won't stand any nonsense." She did not wait to be told, but sat down as soon as she had replied to the last question. "Your name?" turning abruptly to the third prisoner. "You'll have to rise," he added, softly and gently, seeing that Maslova kept her seat. Maslova got up and stood, with her chest expanded, looking at the President with that peculiar expression of readiness in her smiling black eyes. "What is your name?" "Lubov," she said. Nekhludoff had put on his pince-nez, looking at the prisoners while they were being questioned. "No, it's impossible," he thought, not taking his eyes off the prisoner. "Lubov, how can it be?" he thought to himself after hearing her answer. The President was going to continue his questions, but the member with the spectacles interrupted him, angrily whispering something. The President nodded, and turned again to the prisoner. "How is this," he said, "you are not put down here as Lubov?" The prisoner remained silent. "I want your real name." "What is your baptismal name?" asked the angry member. "Formerly I used to be called Katerina." "No, it cannot be," said Nekhludoff to himself, and yet he was now certain that this was she, that same girl, half ward, half servant to his aunts, that Katusha, with whom he had once been in love, really in love, but whom he had betrayed and then abandoned, and never again brought to mind, for the memory would have been too painful, would have convicted him too clearly, proving that he who was so proud of his integrity had treated this woman in a revolting, scandalous way. Yes, this was she. He now clearly saw in her face that strange, indescribable individuality which distinguishes every face from all others. Something peculiar, all its own, not to be found anywhere else. In spite of the unhealthy pallor and the fullness of the face, it was there, this sweet, peculiar individuality, on those lips, in the slight squint of her eyes, in the voice, particularly in the naive smile, and in the expression of readiness on the face and figure. "You should have said so," remarked the President, again in a gentle tone. "Your patronymic?" "I'm illegitimate." "Well, were you not called by your godfather's name?" "Yes, Mikhailovna." "And what is it that she can be guilty of?" continued Nekhludoff in his mind, unable to breathe freely. "Your family name, your surname, I mean," the President went on. "They used to call me by my mother's surname, Maslova." "What class?" "Meshanka," the lowest town class or grade. "Religion? Orthodox?" "Orthodox." "Occupation? What is your occupation?" Maslova remained silent. "What was your employment?" "You know yourself," she said, and smiled. Then, casting a hurried look round the room, again turned her eyes on the President. There was something so unusual in the expression of her face, so terrible and piteous in the meaning of the words she had uttered, in this smile and in the furtive glance she had cast around the room, that the President was abashed, and for a few minutes silence reigned in the court. The silence was broken by someone among the public laughing. Then somebody said, "Shh!" and the President looked up and continued, "Have you ever been tried before?" "Never," answered Maslova softly, and sighed. "Have you received a copy of the indictment?" "I have," she answered. "Sit down." The prisoner leant back to pick up her skirt, in the way a fine lady picks up her train, and sat down, folding her small white hands in the sleeves of her cloak, her eyes fixed on the President. Her face was calm again. The witnesses were called, and some sent away. The doctor who was to act as expert was chosen and called into the court. Then the secretary got up and began reading the indictment. He read distinctly, though he pronounced the I and R alike, with a loud voice, but so quickly that the words ran into one another and formed one uninterrupted, dreary tone. The judges bent now on one, now on the other arm of their chairs, then on the table, then back again, shut and opened their eyes, and whispered to each other. One of the gendarmes several times repressed a yawn. The prisoner Kartinkin never stopped moving his cheeks. Botchkova sat quite still and straight, only now and then scratching her head under the kerchief. Maslova was immovable, gazing at the reader. Only now and then she gave a slight start, as if wishing to reply, blushed, sighed heavily, and changed the position of her hands, looked round, and again fixed her eyes on the reader. Nekhludoff sat in the front row on his high-backed chair, without removing his pince-nez, and looked at Maslova, while a complicated and fierce struggle was going on in his soul. End of Book 1, Chapter 9. Book 1, Chapter 10 of Resurrection. The indictment ran as follows. On the 17th of January, 18, in the lodging-house Mauritania, occurred the sudden death of the second guild merchant Therapont Emilianovich Smelkov of Kurgan. The local police doctor of the 4th district certified that death was due to rupture of the heart, owing to the excessive use of alcoholic liquids. The body of the said Smelkov was interred. After several days had elapsed, the merchant Timokhin, a fellow townsman and companion of the said Smelkov, returned from St. Petersburg, and hearing the circumstances that accompanied the death of the latter, notified his suspicions that the death was caused by poison, given with intent to rob the said Smelkov of his money. This suspicion was corroborated on inquiry, which proved 1. That, shortly before his death, the said Smelkov had received the sum of 3,800 roubles from the bank. When an inventory of the property of the deceased was made, only 312 roubles and 16 kopecks were found. 2. The whole day and night preceding his death, the said Smelkov spent with Lubka, alias Katerina Maslova, at her home and in the lodging-house Mauritania, where she also visited at the said Smelkov's request during his absence to get some money, which she took out of his portmanteau in the presence of the servants of the lodging-house Mauritania, Euphemia Bochkova and Simeon Kartinkin, with a key given her by the said Smelkov. In the portmanteau opened by the said Maslova, the said Bochkova and Kartinkin saw packets of 100-rouble banknotes. 3. On the said Smelkov's return to the lodging-house Mauritania, together with Lubka, the latter, in accordance with the attendant Kartinkin's advice, gave the said Smelkov some white powder given to her by the said Kartinkin, dissolved in brandy. 4. The next morning, the said Lubka, alias Katerina Maslova, sold to her mistress, the witness Kitaeva, a brothel-keeper, a diamond ring given to her, as she alleged, by the said Smelkov. 5. The housemaid of the lodging-house Mauritania, Euphemia Bochkova, placed to her account in the local commercial bank 1,800 roubles. The post-mortem examination of the body of the said Smelkov and the chemical analysis of his intestines proved beyond doubt the presence of poison in the organism, so that there is reason to believe that the said Smelkov's death was caused by poisoning. When cross-examined, the accused, Maslova, Bochkova and Kartinkin, pleaded not guilty, deposing Maslova that she had really been sent by Smelkov from the brothel, where she works, as she expresses it, to the lodging-house Mauritania to get the merchant some money, and that, having unlocked the portmanteau with a key given her by the merchant, she took out 40 roubles, as she was told to do, and that she had taken nothing more. That Bochkova and Kartinkin, in whose presence she unlocked and locked the portmanteau, could testify to the truth of the statement. She gave this further evidence, that when she came to the lodging-house for the second time, she did, at the instigation of Simeon Kartinkin, give Smelkov some kind of powder, which she thought was a narcotic, in a glass of brandy, hoping he would fall asleep and that she would be able to get away from him. And that Smelkov, having beaten her, himself gave her the ring when she cried and threatened to go away. The accused, Euphemia Bochkova, stated that she knew nothing about the missing money, that she had not even gone into Smelkov's room, but that Lubka had been busy there all by herself, that if anything had been stolen it must have been done by Lubka when she came with the merchant's key to get his money. At this point Maslova gave a start, opened her mouth, and looked at Bochkova. When, continued the secretary, the receipt for 1,800 roubles from the bank was shown to Bochkova, and she was asked where she had obtained the money, she said that it was her own earnings for 12 years, and those of Simeon, whom she was going to marry. The accused, Simeon Kartinkin, when first examined, confessed that he and Bochkova, at the instigation of Maslova, who had come with the key from the brothel, had stolen the money and divided it equally among themselves and Maslova. Here Maslova again started, half rose from her seat, and, blushing scarlet, began to say something, but was stopped by the usher. At last, the secretary continued, reading, Kartinkin confessed also that he had supplied the powders in order to get Smelkov to sleep. When examined the second time, he denied having had anything to do with the stealing of the money or giving Maslova the powders, accusing her of having done it alone. Concerning the money placed in the bank by Bochkova, he said the same as she, that is, that the money was given to them both by the lodgers in tips during 12 years' service. The indictment concluded as follows. In consequence of the foregoing, the peasant of the village Borki, Simeon Kartinkin, 33 years of age, the Meshanka Euphemia Bochkova, 43 years of age, and the Meshanka Katerina Maslova, 27 years of age, are accused of having, on the 17th day of January, 1880, jointly stolen from the said merchant Smelkov a ring and money to the value of 2,500 roubles, and having given the said merchant Smelkov poison to drink, with intent of depriving him of life, and thereby causing his death. This crime is provided for in clause 1455 of the Penal Code, paragraphs 4 and 5. End of Book 1, Chapter 10.